Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords. And I'm trying to make this video fairly quickly because I'm about to game over here. As you know, here we do not have a lockdown, and I have one game at least that is still being done completely in person. And that is my Star Adventurer game, by the way. Speaking of which, if you haven't seen it yet, check out the link in the description below. My brand new space opera RPG, Star Adventure. I've been playtesting it in a campaign for quite some time now, but it just came out this week, and what I can say is that in less than a week, it became first a copper bestseller and then a silver bestseller. It became a copper bestseller in less than 24 hours. It became silver bestseller in less than a week. So you got to see what the fuss is about. Besides which, Aaron the Pedantic did an incredible video review of Space Adventure, comparing it to my co-hosts Venger and Grim Jim from Inappropriate Characters, comparing it to their games Alpha Blue and Machinations, and he came to the conclusion that Star Adventure is the next one he would want to play. There was also a poll on Twitter comparing those three games. Star Adventure got 60% of the votes. That is to say, more than the other two combined. So yeah, it was a really good showing, and Star Adventure seems to be really hitting a sweet spot for people. It's a short RPG, very rules focused, lots of info. It's packed in the volume, and it's very affordable. You can get it in print and PDF together, a bundle for just $9.99. So check out that link. Now that I'm done advertising, I'm going to talk about something that I use in not just Star Adventure, but Lion and Dragon, Dark Albion, and every one of my RPGs. And that nowadays has thankfully come back to fashion after a long time when it wasn't in the big name D&D editions, which is something I pushed very hard for the combat system in D&D 5th edition to be done this way, and not the way it was done in previous editions made by Wizards of the Coast, which is the theater of the mind. So, theater of the mind is a term you might have heard if you've looked carefully in your D&D books, or obviously if you're a person who hangs out on RPG forums. And it refers to a situation where you are looking at the combat, not with mechanical aids, but by envisioning the combat as it happens. So let me put it this way. There's two ways, and there has been since the old school edition, right? There's two ways you can handle combat in D&D. The first way is you get out some kind of a mat, or you just use a table, and then you put little miniatures on there, or other things, chits, whatever you want to use to represent the characters and the monsters. Then you carefully measure out how the characters are standing, where they're moving, etc., etc., etc. You do all that stuff, and you play it out as if it was a tactical war game. And from what I understand, it's some of the very, very earliest D&D games were done like that, obviously. But others were also not done like that right from the start. That to differentiate them from the wargaming scenario, and I'm forgetting if I'm getting this 100% right, but I believe that it was the case that, Gary Gygax used miniatures, at least in some of his games, and Dave Arneson didn't. I'm not sure if that's true, but anyways, the other way to do it is the way of the theater of the mind, which is to say, you have your characters, your character sheets, you have the stats for all the monsters, but then you are talking out how the combat happens based on what characters are saying, where they're moving, what they're doing. Are they, firing a ranged weapon? Where are they standing? Who was in what order of combat? But you don't actually have little miniatures on the table. And this obviously makes for two very different games. Because if you're doing the theater of the mind, then there's a certain type of abstraction that's happening, right? A combat done with miniatures on a grid, on a table, or whatever, is going to be essentially a skirmish war game where you can see directly everything that's happening, and there's no real room for for doubt, right? Like if one miniature is blocking another, then you know that rule such and such applies. You know, attacks, you can do stuff like attacks of opportunity and work out all these details and all these things that can be very tricky to do in the more abstract and cinematic style of the theater of the mind. But to me, that's always been the better way to do it. Now, I've also realized that maybe I don't do the theater of the mind the way everybody else who does the theater of the mind does. Because I've noticed that there's some people that, for example, pay no attention to, and I think this is the criticism that people that like the miniature style of combat resolution in D&D make of the theater of the mind people. Because there are apparently some theater of the mind people that just completely throw out things like ranges, right? They don't even worry about it because they're not even thinking about range, direction, movement. You know, if a character, like, they don't care about what a movement rate per round is of a character. So, you know, if they're in the description is you're in a giant cave, there's a huge dragon in front of you at an enormous distance in this giant cave, roll initiative, and whatever, the warrior wins, and the warrior says, my character will charge bravely to attack the dragon. Okay, so he charges bravely to attack the dragon and attacks that same round. It doesn't matter that you've just described a gigantic cave, and the guy is in, you know, heavy plate mail and can move 20 feet per round base movement, right? They don't even think of that because they're just playing in this completely freestyle game where what matters is just a description of what's going on, and you kind of just ignore the fact that a second ago the fighter was maybe 200 feet away from the dragon, and suddenly he's, you know, in 6 seconds he's attacking the dragon. That's never how I've done it. And I think the trick is that there's some people that are much better at kind of visualization than others. And visualization is a skill. It's something that you develop. I mean, in schools of meditation, in many different practices, the tantrists, for example, but many others, in Western magic as well, you go through these arts of memory and arts of visualization that allow you to create complex visions in your own mind. The memory palace is something that's been mentioned in certain shows and things like that more recently. It kind of became hip recently, the idea of the memory palace. That's a very old idea, right? So what you have to do is you bring up this space in your head and you imagine that space and you imagine the distances. That can be very difficult. It takes a lot of training. And there's some people that have more talent and some people that have less. And I think some people that have a purely concrete view of things and don't have a lot of visualization might end up liking using miniatures more than theater of the mind. And I'm not really talking to them. I'm not saying if you just really can't stand the idea of not looking at a miniature on a table to know where you are, if that doesn't work for you, well, okay, forget it. Unless you really want to change, it's going to be too much work for you. But I'm talking to the people who are doing theater of the mind stuff here. If you're doing theater of the mind, then I would urge you to do some basic work at when you set up a combat scenario, right? There's a fight, whether it's happening in a corridor, in a large cave, in a battlefield, in the forest. Visualize in your head what that looks like and try to be as accurate as possible about the distances and the spaces. And then factor that in to how the characters are fighting. Now what this means is you won't end up being as anally precise as when you're using miniatures. It won't be a miniature war game. It still has an element of this flair of the dramatic, which also creates, ironically, a kind of fog of war effect, right? Because the players will all be imagining stuff in their heads, but they don't have to imagine it as deeply as the DM should. The DM should be able, and this is a DM skill that will also later apply for other things like world building or getting into the heads of characters. You have to have very strong visualization skills as a DM to be able to literally enter into that world and see the space in front of you where things are going on, what's happening, and interact in the combats or what have you to see is an action that a character is planning to do. Can they do it? Can they do it this round? Or do they have to do a run movement and then the next round they could attack, right? What are the range penalties, right? You can figure all those things in. They should still be part of combat in the theater of the mind system, unless you really, really, really want to just be totally loosey-goosey. Some parties are fine that way. But most parties will want an element of realism. And one of the critiques of theater of the mind is that people will sometimes say, well, no, wait, but my guy, why, like, what's the point then of having, range penalties? This guy can hit me from wherever just because he said so, or something like that, right? Or I was around the corner, no, you weren't, right? Well, the DM, his job in theater of the mind is to be that map inside this astral space of the game as it's happening, to be able to adjudicate what can and can't players do. Theater of the mind should not just be an excuse for players to be able to do whatever they want if having a credible emulation of a real world is important to you at all. Okay. And I guess that's the main thing I wanted to say about it. I'm going to leave you now because you probably heard a beeping there, and that's probably one of my players who's already here for Star Adventure. So I'm going to cut this short. Talk amongst yourselves. Tell me what you think about Theater of the Mind. And, we'll see you very soon. Currently smoking, nothing yet because I haven't gotten my pipe, but I'm preparing a yerba mate. Take care. Oh, please share this video everywhere. Subscribe. If you want to support me, then you can feel free to purchase any of my products, Dark Albion, Lion and Dragon, the brand new Star Adventure, the Medieval Old School Companion, or any of my RPG Pundit Presents products. You buy any of those, and it's like it's as if you were throwing a few Patreon bucks at me, or whatever the kids do these days, but you're also getting something in return, and that encourages me to make more videos. Thank you very much. Again, another way you can really help, share this video everywhere. Let's get talking about how the theater of the mind should really work. Take care.